In 1944, Fritz was a 12-year-old boy who lived with his mother Elisabeth in West Germany. They were forced to move to this small remote cabin in the Hürtgen forest when their previous home was bombed by the American-led Allied forces. This area was infamous for its brutally cold temperatures, harsh winds, freezing rain, and unrelenting snowfall. In other words, Wim Hof's Tuesday. In December of 1944, the Germans had just launched the Battle of the Bulge, their vicious, all-out, last-ditch effort to take control of the war against the West. On December 24th, 1944, as young Fritz and his mother prepared Christmas Eve dinner, they heard a knock at the door. It was 3 armed American soldiers. 2 standing, 1 lying in the snow, dying of a gunshot wound. The Americans got separated from their unit and spent the last 3 days lost in the snow and hiding from German soldiers. From the first-hand account of Fritz himself, told to Reader's Digest and published in 1973, Fritz said the following: "I was almost paralyzed with fear. For though I was a child, I knew that harsh law of war. Anyone giving aid and comfort to the enemy would be shot." Elisabeth noticed that the soldier bleeding out in the snow was young enough to be her own son, but she too was well aware of the deadly danger of harboring the enemy. So she did the right thing. She and Fritz helped up the wounded soldier and invited the 3 men into their tiny cabin that Christmas Eve night. They tended to the young man's wounds and stretched their modest meal to accommodate their newfound guests. Then Fritz heard another knock at the door. Assuming there were more lost Americans, he opened the door without hesitation. And standing there were in fact a few more young armed soldiers, in German uniforms. Elisabeth hurried to the door and closed it behind her. Also lost, the German soldiers asked her for a place to rest. "Of course," she said, "and you can even have a hot meal to eat and a warm place to stay the night. But you must know, we have 3 other guests, whom you may not consider friends." The German corporal's face lit up with anger. "Americans!" Elisabeth said yes, but cold like you, hungry like you, exhausted like you, lost like you. And then she sternly looked the corporal in the eye and said, "Tonight is Christmas Eve, and there will be no fighting here, only peace." Weary and cautious, the Germans agreed and put down their weapons. Elisabeth then explained the situation to the Americans. They too, cautiously and reluctantly, agreed and handed over their weapons. Once they all gathered inside, the bitter enemies stood on opposite sides of the room, staring one another down, wondering how long this tense silence and temporary truce might last. Then young Fritz broke the tension. "More to add to the feast," he said, running into the room with potatoes and oats from their already bare pantry. Then one of the American soldiers began to sing Silent Night. Then the German corporal reached into his bag and offered bread and a bottle of wine for the table. Elisabeth huddled the men closely, sat them down, and as the meal was served, she bowed her head and said grace. Fritz looked up and noticed something that he said he would never forget: tears in the eyes of his mother and in the eyes of all of the soldiers. Perhaps from the heart-wrenching pain of missing their own loved ones on Christmas. Perhaps from the overwhelming gratitude of this warm meal and kind company. Perhaps from the relief of not having to fight during this Christmas Eve truce. Throughout the night, stories were exchanged, wine was guzzled, and bread was broken. The next morning, the German soldiers helped the Americans craft a stretcher from a pair of poles and an old tablecloth. The German corporal took out a map and showed the Americans how to get back to their own lines. The men shook hands and headed off in opposite directions, meeting as sworn enemies, saying goodbye as friends. In a 1997 interview, Fritz spoke of the lessons he learned from that Christmas Eve miracle. He said, "My mother's inner strength taught me the practical meaning of the words goodwill toward mankind." Today, as our world continues to be ravaged by war and evil deeds, today as our world continues to be polarized, perhaps more polarized than ever, still, today, we too can find the inner strength Elisabeth found to do the right thing. Today, we too can find the courage young Fritz found to stand tall in the face of fear. Today, on this Christmas Eve, wherever we are, whatever we're struggling with, whoever we have felt negative feelings, resentments, or grudges against, whether they look like us or not, we too can put down our weapons. We too can find the trust those soldiers found in the common denominators that we share in our humanity with our fellow men. And we too can extend a little more goodwill toward mankind. Oh, and the true gift of our inner strength, courage, trust in humanity, and goodwill toward mankind is that it doesn't expire after one night. Deucer out.